Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. So inshallah in today's class I'm going to just back up a little bit to take that last bit that we left off with in the previous lecture to talk about the judge must treat both parties equally. So I kind of rushed through that. So we're going to pick up on that and let's talk a little bit about how the judge is supposed to deal with both litigants on an equal basis. He gives us some parameters about where they sit, how he addresses them in eye contact. And then the next bit, we're going to talk about the impermissibility of accepting gifts. I mean, obviously, it's a bribe. If you're a judge and somebody comes in and a litigant comes and gives you a gift, it's a bribe. But there is some intricate things because judges tend to be, in the Islamic context, tend to be prominent people of the community. And as prominent people of the community, they're going to a mosque regularly, they're going to celebrations, walimas, they're going to janazah prayers, they're going to aqiqahs, those kind of things. So how does a judge navigate those social interaction in which a litigant might be there? And the gifts, what happens if he has a friend who usually maybe I'm a judge and one of my friends is a farmer. He always gives me a gift like, the beginning of Muharram every year. Well, what happens if this person all of a sudden becomes a litigant? Can I accept the gift or not? So there's a little bit of detail in that. And then he's going to give us 10 things or 10 situations that a judge must avoid pronouncing or issuing a verdict if he is experiencing one of these 10 things. I've made allusion to these 10 in the past lectures, I think 2 or 3 lectures ago, but here we're going to get into some detail and we're going to get into the details. I want to explain them to you so we can understand why, and then maybe we can also postulate some other circumstances that might occur in which a judge would want to avoid. The next bit is about how the judge listens to evidence. I don't think I'm going to get into that bit just yet, so I'm going to stop at the list of 10 if I have enough space to do that. And those are the main topics for today. So just keeping in mind, as I said in the outset, that this is really a larger topic, courts and whatnot, and they have their own independent writings you find, and different authors will have different writings, but it's an opportunity for us to discuss them here. Okay, let's begin this discussion in the next clip, inshallah. So we begin the way we normally begin, which is to turn directly to the text of the Matn of Abi Shuja' and to read the Arabic portion of what will consume our class today. قال المصنف رحمه الله ونفعنا بعلومه في الدارين آمين. ويسوي بين الخصمين في 3 أشياء في المجلس وفي اللحظ وفي اللفظ وفي اللحظ ولا يجوز أن يقبل الهدية من أهل عمله ويجتنب القضاء في 10 مواضع عند الغضب والجوع والعطش وشدة الشهوة والحزن والفرح المفرط وعند المرض ومدافعة الأخبثين وعند النعاس وشدة الحر والبرد. So our beloved Qadi Abu Shuja' radiallahu anhu, he says, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy on him and may we benefit from his knowledge in this world and in the next. The judge must treat both parties equally in 3 things. This is the bit that we took in the last class. Where they sit, how he addresses them, and eye contact. It is not permissible for him, meaning the judge, to accept a gift from people associated with his work. He avoids deciding cases on 10 occasions: when he is angry, hungry, thirsty, those are 3, feeling sexual desire, sadness, or joy to the extent that it causes negligence, that's 4, 5, and 6, is sick, that's number 7, needs to relieve himself, number 8, is drowsy, number 9, in extremely hot or cold, 10. Okay, before the commentary, as has been our habit from the very beginning, let us look at some of the adillah that might concern us. I know in the Hashiyah there are some adillah. Well, I read you that hadith in Ad-Dar al-Qutni about if somebody has been given the ibtila, the calamity of being a judge, let them deal with the people equally. We did that bit. About the gifts. This comes from a long hadith that's in Bukhari and Muslim that a man came to the Prophet ﷺ, with a gift when he was going to be a judge, and then the Prophet ﷺ made a public statement, a khutbah, repulsing it, or acknowledging that you can't do that. I'm not going to read it, it's just a long hadith. As far as the bribe, this comes in a hadith in Tirmidhi on the authority of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, that the Prophet ﷺ said, لَعَنَ اللَّهُ الرَّاشِي وَالْمُرْتَشِي فِي الْحُكْمِ, that Allah Ta'ala, لَعَنَ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ ﷺ, I'm sorry, Abu Hurairah said that the Prophet ﷺ cursed the one who gives the bribe and the one who takes the bribe in matters of courts and adjudication. Now obviously, the la'an or the cursing is one of the indications of an act being a major sin. May Allah Ta'ala protect us from that. And then some of the not giving a ruling or not acting as the judge when you're experiencing those 10 things that he mentioned. We have a hadith in Muslim, Bukhari and Muslim, on the authority of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, that he heard the Prophet ﷺ say, لا يخدين حكم بين اثنين وهو غضبان. Do not let the judge or do not adjudicate a case between two people when you are upset. Okay. Now, let me get the Hashia page going in front of me, and then let us begin our journey with a little bit of commentary from the stuff that we left off in the past, which is about the judge being equal. Now, he says the judge must treat both parties equally in 3 things. Before I get into this, I do want to mention that there is a literature in Islamic legal books and whatnot, in our madhab and others, about the issue of what happens if there's a Muslim litigant and a dhimmi litigant. And you will find in this that when it comes to how they sit, that the Muslim is meant to sit higher than the dhimmi. So that literature exists. I'm not going to act like it doesn't exist. It definitely exists. And that goes back to, I believe it was in this unit, or even in the previous unit, when we talked about this matter of dhimmis and non-Muslims and houses of worship and clothing and whatnot, that the general default in the pre-modern world meaning in which the modern form of the nation state and modern forms of citizenship, because all of these are new things. The modern nation state and modern citizenship in the history of humanity is like, it happened this morning and now we're in the afternoon. It's a very recent thing. So here we're talking about before all of that, in which one's citizenship or one's belonging to the main body politic was basically by obviously their allegiance to the power that be, but their identity was based on their religion. There was this idea of the sharaf, or the honor of Islam over the other religions, being the last religion, etc., and in Dar al-Islam, that there would be these type of rules. And I think we talked about that then, so I don't have to rehash that here, but I just want to be, academically honest that this part of the legal text will have that type of, and in al-Bayjuri he talks about that. Of course, in the modern nation state, that's not going to be the case, because the concept of modern citizenship equalizes, becomes an identifier above the identity of religion. So you're like, I am this country citizen first, and I happen to be a Muslim. I am the citizen of this country first, and I happen to be a Christian. I am a citizen of this country first, and I happen to be Jewish, so on and so forth. So the religion becomes like a secondary identifier, where that's what I was looking for. But whereas when this was written, or when these issues were debated, and you'll find religion was the primary identifier. So if religion is the primary identifier, and this is Darul Islam, then there is an advantage of being a Muslim over a non-Muslim. I mean, there's no other way of saying it, because that's the case, because of the finality of Islam. Anyway, so I just want to be academically honest when it comes to that. Again, not necessarily valid today. So the judge must treat both parties equally in three things where they sit. Okay, so this is a commentary on where they sit. They have to sit in equal sitting. So we said that the judge is supposed to be elevated, and they're probably in front of them or next to the judge would be the litigants. Most people are familiar with the American legal system because of American cinema and shows and whatnot. So probably when I say a court case, probably that's what you're thinking about. And other Western legal traditions, even in the Muslim world, Arab world, I mean, that's pretty much how the courts are. There's a bench. That's why they say it's the approach the bench. That's the elevation of the judge, and then both litigants have to be on equal sitting, because there can't be a favoring of one versus the other. And then how the judge addresses them. So the judge can't speak to one side and not speak to the other side. The judge has to speak to both sides at the same time and has to be able to communicate, give them both equal time to respond, and argue their case or defend the accusations laid against them. And then eye contact. So eye contact is a significant part of the legal tradition, which is why we said in the madhab, in our madhab at least, we can't have a blind judge, because you have to look. The judge has to look, and then the litigants have to see the judge and have to see that the judge is looking. That kind of human-to-human contact is quintessential. It's also, by the way, very important in the issue of ifta, as you've probably heard me say that before. So that's something that we have to look out for, and that there has to be an equal. So all of those three things, where the litigants sit, the space of time that they're allowed to speak to the judge and the judge speaks to them, and the eye contact, all have to be equal. Even in the case if there's a non-Muslim litigant, other than that little footnote that I mentioned in the beginning, both sides have to speak equal amounts and the judge has to look at them equal amounts. So being a non-Muslim in that case doesn't affect the equality that is required. Now that's kind of the discussion that I wanted to have, that I didn't necessarily have in the previous one. So we'll put a pin in it here, and I'll pick up the discussion in the next clip, inshallah. All right, so moving on with the text, next is the bit about accepting gifts. It is not permissible for him, meaning the judge, to accept a gift from people associated with his work. So, it is not impermissible for a judge to accept a gift, period. That's not what we're talking about. So, people can gift judges and whatnot. The issue that we're talking about, or the issue that he's talking about here, is if there is somebody who's either has an active case in which the judge is presiding over, or might have an actual case that the judge is presiding over, then that case, obviously that gift is impermissible, because then it would attack the neutrality of the judge. You could call the judge's judgment into question. And that's basically what a bribe is, right? A bribe is that you're paying to get something that's not your right. That's the definition of the bribe in the Sharia, which we'll get to momentarily. So don't misconstrue this to mean that the judge can't accept any gifts or can't have any social life. That's not the case. What it means is that the judge can't take something from either somebody who, as I said, who's actively has a case in front of the court or might have a case. So let's say, I have a dispute with my neighbor and I know that I'm going to go to the court. And I call up my judge friend and asking him, in a roundabout way, and the judge I'm kind of almost tipping my hat to the judge to the fact that this case you might hear from me tomorrow in the court case. And then, oh, by the way, here are some fruits from the orchard or something like that. Or my wife baked you a cake, or I don't know, whatever, I'm just making it up. In that case, the judge can't. This is haram. Because the judge knows that there's a potential that the litigant, that person will become a litigant. Now, before we get into the details of that, he has an interesting couple paragraphs here about social obligations. So he says when it comes to attending walimas, marriage banquets, or a janazah, or something like, or janazah is different because that's an act of worship. A walima, or like an aqiqah, etc. If he knows that the litigants will be there, but the walima invitation is not by one of the litigants, then it's okay for the judge to be there. But let's say that there's party A and party B. Party A is the inviting party. So the judge can't go because it's a direct kind of relationship and contact with that person. So being a judge is difficult because even in the modern world, even in the Western world, in the secular world, the judges, they have to conduct themselves appropriately and they have to be above board. They can't accept gifts. Judges get slammed all the time for accepting gifts from wealthy people that, might have influence on the court or this or that, or a vacation with a family or something like that. So the judge in the social aspect has to be very careful not to get caught up in that. He says it's also a good thing. It's a mandub, it's a recommended thing that the judge doesn't engage in buying and selling. Maybe he has a deputy that does that on his behalf. But if the judge is, like hustling and out there like making money and stuff like that, it's just very easy that he could easily get caught up in a situation where his judgment is compromised because he's end up representing this person, or that person, this supplier, or this customer, or whatnot. So the judge, and I said this in the previous lecture, it's like, you kind of have to be like a little bit like a monk. I mean, you kind of have to withdraw, and you have to be a zahid, you have to be an ascetic. And when you read the biographies of the great judges of Islam, it's, as I said, you're almost like reading the biographies of the Sufis because they have very much that demeanor. The only really difference between them and the Sufi biographies is they're not like out somewhere by themselves making dhikr. They're like there every day adjudicating these cases. So it's a very, very tough job. And other than having to have the requisite book knowledge, theoretical knowledge, which is our job is to convey that to you, I want you to always see also the personal decorum and adab that the judge has to have to be above board. It's a lot. Okay, now, what happens if somebody is used to giving the judge a gift? I think in the introductory clip I said something along the lines like, let's say I'm a judge and I have a friend who has a farm, and the beginning of each Islamic year, the beginning of Muharram, they always give me some fruits and vegetables as a gift. That's fine. But then there comes a situation in which I'm a judge and then they might be a litigant and they want to give me the gift with a little bit of extra. The gift is fine because it's something that's an aada, it's usually happens, but the extra thing is not happen. So let's say let's make it a little bit more realistic, that the farmer wants to be generous to all of the Sharia judges in the area. So every year in the beginning of Muharram, the farmer gives a little bit to all of the judges equally. So it's an equal type of situation. But this year he gave all of them equally, but for me, he gave me a little bit extra. That little bit extra, that would be haram for me to take because it's like, well, why are you giving me extra? Is it a bribe or not a bribe? And then if I'm a judge in this jurisdiction, but then I travel, I'm like in a neighboring town, I'm visiting a friend or something like that, and then the person that becomes a litigant or a potential litigant sends me that gift there, that's also haram for me to accept. So it's not about where I am, it's about that this person is going to have business in front of the court. He's going to have business in front of my bench, and therefore I cannot take anything lest it be misconstrued that it's a bribe, or lest I actually have a soft spot for that and want to help that person out. Okay, I think that should be pretty straightforward. There's just a concluding paragraph. Let me just see if there's anything extra that I want to convey to you. Let me be a little bit more clear. In the example that I have a friend that always gives me a gift, it's okay for me to accept the gift, but if I become a judge and I have to hear that person's case, even if they're constantly always giving me the gift, in that case it's haram to take the gift and the extra thing of the gift. That's what I kind of misspoke. Because I'm accepting a gift underneath this now new umbrella that I'm about to hear this case. That opens the door for attacks and not to be biased. There was something about bribes I think I wanted to say. Okay, he mentions the same hadith. Okay, let's now begin the next bit, which we'll have to really do in the next clip, but we can start it here. These are the situations that the judge needs to avoid deciding cases if the judge is experiencing. So before we get into the list, maybe we can just talk a little bit about what is the case. The basic idea is that anything that can negatively impact the judge's reason and stasis. That's the way I like to look at it. That's why he'll say things like if he's too happy. It's not all negative stuff. Because if you're too happy and something you just got, like this big piece of news, you just found out that your wife is pregnant or you have grandkids or I don't know, whatever the case may be. If you're overflowing with happiness, you're just, yeah, sure, whatever, mesh, okay, sure, you're going to be easy with the case. So no, the judge has to be just. You want to be merciful because Allah Ta'ala is merciful and we distribute the justice of the Sharia with a lot of mercy and love, but you have to do justice to the text, to the rules. So anything that takes the judge away from their normal stasis, that's what we're after. And so this list of 10 might not necessarily be exhaustive. It might be, we might be able to postulate some other things that are happening. Because if you're outside of your normal stasis, then your thinking process, your reason will not be clear. And then therefore, other than the personal sin of engaging in being a judge and adjudicating a case when you're not up to it, you might misguide people. You might give the wrong ruling. And thirdly, you also open the ruling to be attacked, just like if you accepted a gift. So for all of these things, it's very important that the judge will avoid these type of situations and anything that would bring up those type of situations that we'll talk about in the next clip, inshallah. Okay, so what are these 10 situations we keep talking about? He says the first one is when the judge is angry. He says whether he's angry for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or angry for his own self. Because the effects of anger is that it clouds the judgment. So let's say the judge is very pious, very ascetic, and they only get mad for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then they hear one of the litigants say something, and it just, how could you do that? That's an affront to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're mad. So at that point, the judge has to recuse themselves or take a break or something like that, because that anger, while it's justified to be angry for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as indeed that was the type of anger of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, it can cloud the judgment and then you might not be able to give the correct judgment in that case. Okay, and then the judge is hungry or overly full. So that's from the commentary in the Hashiyah, not in the text. But if the judge is so hungry that they're having stomach pains and they can't think clearly, or they ate too much at the previous meal and they're just so full that they're just like falling asleep and stuff like that, both of those things means that they're not operating at peak level and they won't be able to give the case its due right or its due focus. Okay, angry, hungry, thirsty. Thirsty is the same thing. Obvious thirst. obvious hunger, obvious overeating, or it's overstuffed. So it doesn't mean that you can't be a judge during Ramadan when you're fasting, or if it's like a fast day, like it's Ashura or something like that. But it has to be to a point in which the judge is not able to focus, is not with it. And unfortunately, a lot of this is going to fall on the judge. Sure, there will be some kind of protocols in the court, and maybe there's like a deputy or an officer of the court that can kind of monitor it. But at the end of the day, like, how can you measure the judge's hunger? Things like the judge's anger, if they just start yelling and screaming, they turn red in the face, maybe that's obvious. But other things, the judge has to, so this is part of the training to be a judge, is you have to be able to do this. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention something about the presents. Sorry, I just recalled, I apologize. The mufti can accept presents because the mufti's pronouncement, the fatwa, is non-binding. So what makes the present for the judge haram in the scenarios that we mentioned is that the judge's pronouncement is binding. And therefore, if you affect that, then you're affecting something that's binding. Whereas in the mufti has no skin in the game because you don't have to follow what the mufti says anyway. However, from propriety point of view, it is best that the mufti avoid taking gifts for the same reasons that we talked about. Sorry, it just popped into my head that I forgot that. Okay, coming back to this list of 10. So he says anger, hunger, thirst. And then number 4 is feels sexual desire. So he is in a state where he's longing to be with his wife. Maybe he was traveling or she was traveling for a long time. He just got a message that she's returned home, and that just kind of triggered the sexual desire in him. He's going to have to go satisfy that before he can pronounce, because that's a moment where I think I've commented elsewhere in some of my public classes. You're kind of like alone and like kind of in yourself so much that you can't really do anything else other than that, let alone adjudicate a case. And then 5 and 6, sadness or joy to the extent that it causes negligence, sadness or joy. Where is it in the text? Yeah, sadness or joy for whatever reason, whatever personal reasons might come. Because it's going to cloud your judgment. You're not going to be able to focus. And then he says, is sick. That's an easy one to understand. So if you have the cold or the flu, if you just have the sniffles or if you have a little cough or something like that, you might be okay. But if you have like a bad fever, if your fever is spiking, and people that are dedicated to their work and their vocation, they're the type of people like, no, it's okay, I'll do it, I can go, let me just put on something heavy. No, that's when somebody has to be like, Your Honor, you stay home. Fadilataka, that's it, you got to stay home. You're not going to come. So, and sometimes the sickness can be physical, like they broke their arm or they're in their pain or something like that. I've had surgery before where I've had to take some serious heavy painkillers. You don't want me commenting on anything serious. As a matter of fact, and this is just a little tangent, when I had this surgery, I was going to have to be on narcotics for I think I was on narcotics for 6 months. It was a major surgery. Alhamdulillah, Allah was generous and gentle with me and it passed. But I remember they gave me like a little booklet that I had to read the night before the surgery. And one of the things that said in the booklet is, starting now, you cannot make any life decisions or major decisions. And I never really understood what that was until I got into that state. And then after I got out of that state, it took me about maybe almost another year till I actually felt just like myself again. Now, I'm not being dramatic. I was okay after I got off the medicine because I needed to get off. But I did not feel like myself for at least a year and a half, 2 years. So sometimes the physical pain is serious, or sometimes you can hallucinate if you have like a very bad fever or something like that. But you don't want to admit that you're sick. So sometimes in these cases, you need somebody to help you. Be like, no, you need to stay home. There's no way you're coming to court and doing this stuff now because you're going to mess up. Okay, needs to relieve himself, which is a good translation because that's not what's in the Arabic. In the Arabic, it's al-mudafa'at al-akhbathaini, holding back urine and feces. But actually, if you have flatulence, it's the same thing. So the same ruling. So this is actually a good thing, and I think Al-Bayjuri comments on that he says if he had said عند مدافعة الحدث, holding back, relieving yourself, it would be better, and that's the translation that we have here. So if you have to go, you got to go. It's just like prayer. It's makruh to hold it in and pray, relieve yourself, make wudu, and then pray. And here it's even more serious with the judges. You can't, if you're like holding yourself in like this, you're gonna rush through the case. And then is drowsy. So sometimes when I teach, I get drowsy, and I mean I can attest to that too. I mean I have sometimes with schedules you have no choice; you just got to show up, or you didn't get a good night's rest. But when you're dealing with people's lives and money's at stake and inheritance at stake, or life and death, or it's a murder case, I mean you can't be like nodding off. I actually went to a mufti of a Muslim majority country. I won't say which one, and in the middle of me talking, the mufti fell asleep and started to snore. I was probably one of the most awkward situations that I felt embarrassed for him, and then the guy next to me said, "Keep going." I was like, well, "What's the point? The guy's asleep." Anyway, I just thought of that right now. So if the judge is like dozing off, they have to take a pause, and that's why in dramas you'll see this when the judge will say, like, "Okay, let's take a 15-minute recess, or let's recess until after lunch." Oftentimes what the judge needs to do is just needs to take a breather, needs to grab a bite to eat, use the bathroom, in our case pray, maybe they take a power nap, but the judge has got to be operating on all cylinders all the time to do justice. And then lastly he says if it's extremely hot or cold. Remember we said in the adab of the court of the judge needs to have a place that's not too hot and not too cold for exactly this reason. So if the judge is experiencing too much heat or too much cold in the courtroom, then it's just going to be uncomfortable. I mean, blazing heat in the summer, like think of like sub-Saharan Africa is like very hot, or like a hot and humid country, or think of it's like sub-zero Celsius or even sub-zero Fahrenheit for that matter. It's just so cold and like the heater's broken. It's the inclement weather is what we say. And those are the type of things in which schools and businesses are closed, courts are closed. Those are the situations he's talking about. A judge can't do their judge job if they are experiencing those kind of elements because it will take them off. Now, unfortunately, even if the judge does that, and they sin doing that, their pronouncement still counts. And that's why it's very serious that they're aware of it and avoid it when they can. Wallahu ta'ala a'la wa a'lam wa sallallahu ala sayyidina wa mawlana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. All right, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. We made some progress today. We make progress every day, but today felt like we did a bigger chunk. We went back for a little bit to talk about the equality of the different parties, about they have to be equal where they sit, the litigants that is, how they are addressed, and eye contact. I tried to give you an honest assessment of some of the what we find in our legal literature when it's dealing with Muslims and non-Muslims, and how a Muslim would sit higher than a non-Muslim, and I kind of explained where that comes from, not shying away from it, but explaining where it comes from and how that might not necessarily be necessarily applicable in the modern context. But the point is that the judge has to give both sides equal attention, equal space to argue, because that's the only way justice can be. The Prophet ﷺ said, you have to be careful when you talk to me because one of you might be more eloquent in how they present their case to me. So we don't want to be, the judge doesn't want to give a situation or create a scenario where they might give the other person an advantage over another person. Then we talked extensively, and almost an entire clip about the judge not accepting a gift from the people that either they're going to hear from or that they work from, so that we can cut any whiff that the judge is dealing in something impropriety, or there's impropriety in the case, or he's being bribed. And then we talked about what happens if he normally receives a gift and then he gets a little bit of extra. What happens if he normally receives a gift and then that person becomes a potential litigant. All of those scenarios, basically we say the judge doesn't accept money. Commenting and reminding ourselves that the mufti can accept gifts because the mufti's pronouncement, the fatwa, is not binding. In the case of the judge, it's binding. It's the binding nature of the pronouncement that makes the gift impermissible if the person is going either a current litigant or potential litigant. And we talked about those scenarios. And then lastly, we did the list of 10 things or situations in which a judge does not give their pronouncement. I don't have to restate them here because they're pretty straightforward. But the upshot of all of that is the judge doesn't want to give a pronouncement at any time in which their mind is clouded, in which they are away from their normal stasis. Because in that case, it clouds the mind and they're not able to adjudicate properly, and then that could call the whole justice system into question. And it's impermissible for the judge to do that and has to look out for those things. Those are the major topics we talked about. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Mawlana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.